Good morning, everyone. I'm Virginia Birrell, the CEO of the Australia-China Business Council in Victoria, and it's my pleasure to be the MC for this morning's sessions. Before I introduce myself and our guest speaker, I would just like to remind you to open up your app, have a look at the schedule button, and look at today's session, and be prepared to submit any questions that you would like via the app. And we'll also have microphones at the end of the session as well. So I know that from the wonderful information that our guest speaker will deliver, you'll have a lot of questions, and we want you to have the opportunity to learn as much from today's session. I joined the Australia-China Business Council as CEO in 2014 with the primary responsibilities to optimise the performance and strategic growth of the ACBC in Victoria, and to ensure member companies in the city, metropolitan and regional areas are provided with key training, policy advice and strategic networking activities to grow their business opportunities with China. A highlight of our branch's operation is our working groups in the key China-Australia Free Trade Agreement sectors of agribusiness, education, energy and resources, finance, health and tourism, which are platforms for advocacy, business-to-business information sharing, and provide a rich resource to feed the branch's extensive events program, which over the last 5 years has welcomed over 15,500 attendees in Victoria. We work in close liaison with Austrade, DFAT, the federal and state governments, and particularly Global Victoria, the China Chamber of Commerce in Australia, the Chinese Consulate, and over 3,000 individuals connected with our branch. As you're aware, Victoria has around 21,000 farm businesses, which employ an average of 77,000 people. In 2017-18, the state's temperate climate, high-quality soil and clean water helped the industry produce $14.9 billion worth of agricultural products from 11 million hectares. But we need to do better in Victoria and Australia-wide to utilise our valuable resources, and it's through outstanding expos such as today's Global Table we can learn about best practice, overseas developments and future opportunities. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mark Tanner, the Managing Director, China Skinny, who will discuss China beyond 2020, the future of the largest marketplace in the world. Mark is an insightful presenter, and he will speak on top trends based on research and industry experience and how to understand key trends in this dynamic market. Please welcome Mark.
Thank you, Virginia. All right. Good to see you all here, and walking around today, there's an awful lot of products. I'm like, yeah, that would sell really well in China. That would sell really well in China. So there's a lot of great things coming out of Victoria and Australia as a whole. I like this photo here just because it represents for me the way a lot of people see China, and it's everyone kind of looks the same, everyone kind of thinks the same, and I'm sure anyone that's been to China will know it is completely different from region to region, from demographic to demographic. But before I talk about food, I thought I'd talk about something completely, seemingly irrelevant, and that's cars. Does anyone here drive a Porsche? Oh, one man in the crowd shyly put up his hand. Good on you. It's interesting. If I used to live in North America, and I always used to like Porsches when I was little, and I'd see these cars, and I guess the way people buy a Porsche in America, they'll go to university, study really hard, then they'll get their MBA, then they'll work for the man and save really hard to put their kids through college. And then around 50, a little older, they'll have their midlife crisis and they'll buy a Porsche. The average age of a Porsche owner in America is 52. Not far off, I'm sure, but you're a little bit younger. Across the Pacific in China, the average age is 35, so significantly younger. It really just represents that these consumers are quite a lot younger, the ones that are spending. And that's with good reason. If you look at the average income of these consumers, and I'm sorry, that's really, really small, but if you look on the left, this is USA. It's kind of like Australia, like most countries, the older you are, the more you earn. And then you get a little bit old to kind of understand things like e-commerce and social media, and you get a little bit redundant. But overall, experience equals income. China, completely the opposite. The highest earning income group is 18 to 29, and then it goes 30 to 45, and then the oldies are not earning that much at all. If you look at tech, the highest earning income group, 90% of all tech workers are aged under 30. And it's with good reason. If you look at someone born in the 90s, they are 7 times more likely to have a degree than someone born in the 70s. They're also much more likely to live in the cities, where you earn more than 3 times as much income as the countryside. They're also more open. And it's like millennials everywhere. They're much more open-minded, and they view, foreign influences typically with more openness. This was done by Pew. This is pre-trade war, so it's probably dropped a little bit, but perception of America, for youngies under 35, 60% view America positively. I think it'd probably be below 50 at the moment. Whereas those over 30 goes up to down to around a third. So more open. We're also seeing more. And we see it, at China Skinny, we do quite a lot of work in the tourism space as well as the food space, and we see a lot of crossover. Our work with Tourism Australia, we found that consumers that come, or Chinese that come to visit Australia, are much more likely to have an affinity with Australian food. It goes up from around 27% that think Australian food and beverage is good, and those that actually travel here, it goes up to around 65, 70%. Year on year. So these guys are travelling more, they're seeing more, they're experiencing more and more open to this food. Also more digital. And digital is influencing, as I'll talk about in a sec, influencing the way food is consumed and the way that it's bought. So if you look at Chinese consumers, as I said, they're not all one as a whole. They are quite different. I hate to generalise because Chinese consumers can be quite different. Even in one city, they can be quite different from one group to one group. But we do research all over China, and we find there's some really common themes coming through in these consumers. Those born in the 80s, they've grown up, they've seen China go from a fairly humble, not a very wealthy, not a very influential place, to one of the most powerful countries, one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. And as a result, they believe that they drink the Kool-Aid. They believe that China dream. And the way they purchase, the way they behave is quite conforming, probably the way Beijing would love everyone to behave. You fast forward a little bit, 10 years later, and you have a completely different group. These guys were born in an affluent China. They've only ever known an affluent China. They have born with a smartphone in their hands, and instead of conforming, they actually try hard not to conform. So they're much more independent. They show their personalities, who they are through what they buy, what they do, and you see it on the social media that they post, whether it be on the short video, they're posting crazy videos, just how different they are. Then another 5 years on, and you get a completely different group, the post-95s, and these guys are post-90s to the extreme. So the way they behave is a lot of the conforming traditional behaviour that older generations do. They are quite the opposite. And a lot of older generations will look at these guys and think, wow, you guys are very breaking traditions. So the way they behave, the way they consume is completely different from those older generations. Woof. But it's not just that age group, it's also geography. It's an incredibly diverse country. And a lot of people will say, yeah, China, it's one of these countries, it's like Europe for diversity. And then in the same breath, they'll come into China and they'll have this homogenous China strategy. And as I'm sure everyone's aware that's been to China, you've got Beijing, you've got Shanghai, you've got Shenzhen, Guangzhou, all tier 1 cities, quite different from one another. Beijing is the food, the climate is completely different, the tastes, the lifestyles, they're all very different from one another versus down in the south in Guangzhou and Shenzhen, subtropical, what they eat, the way they eat is quite different. But if you look at from a food, from a lifestyle, but there's the emotional stuff, which is incredibly diverse. So China Skinny, we do a lot of research around. We find places like Beijing much more nationalistic up there than somewhere like Shanghai. The men are much more macho. Like if you get a man in Shanghai, they're famous for carrying their partners' handbags around, do a lot of the cooking, cleaning. So from a target market for food, you're probably going to have quite different targeting in a city like Shanghai versus Beijing. A much more creative, international messaging really resonates a lot more with Shanghainese than Beijingers. But then you look down south, the other two tier 1 cities, Guangzhou and Shenzhen, everyone kind of lumps those two together. But if you look at just the language spoken, it's quite different. So Guangzhou's an old city. Most of these millennials living in Guangzhou have grown up in Guangzhou. A lot of them will live with their parents. And they all speak Cantonese. Whereas Shenzhen is a city of migrants. So you've got people coming in from all over China to find their fortune. As a result, the common language spoken is Mandarin. That's just a surface level thing. Whereas you get the family bonding, which is a really common message, particularly for a lot of the advertising around Chinese New Year. It's all about the family and seeing and eating together, and it's common in a lot of food and beverage commercials and marketing. But if you look at someone in Guangzhou who's living with their parents, seeing them every night or at least weekly, the messaging for family bonding is quite different from someone in Shenzhen who most likely lives away from where their family is. They may only see their family once a month or once a quarter or even once every Chinese New Year. So that type of messaging can be quite different. But if you come in and you look at a city like Shanghai, where China Skinny's based, you have more people than Australia. You also have a GDP of more than Thailand, more than the UAE. You have a purchase power parity similar to Switzerland. So just those things alone, those countries alone, you probably localise for them. But when you come to China, you're just having this generic strategy for Shanghai, Beijing, and all these other cities that you probably want to be a little more localised. And something we're seeing, and I expect we'll see a lot more of it in the next decade, is localisation by city. So whether it be marketing, product development, even packaging, can be quite specific city by city. So two different things that are related. And something that we do a lot of is look at products, and we do an analysis and things to really try and understand the trends, what's hot right now and what's trending. And some of the work we did with dairy companies, and we've worked with about a dozen dairy companies, and we found we're doing some analysis with our tools, and we looked at the average price of milk per litre online. Looked at foreign brands, a little over $2 Australian, 11 Quai 60. Does anyone want to guess the price of domestic milk per litre? I'll give you a little bit of context here. China is changing incredibly rapidly, and what we speak to consumers all the time is something that still comes up. Although these trends are changing, you're getting melamine. It's still popping up in people's minds all the time. It's still very raw. So with that in mind, there's this perception that foreign is better than the domestic brands. So we went in there and we thought, 12 Quai a litre for foreign. Domestic's probably quite a lot cheaper. But it turned out to be 38% more. And we were scratching our heads and we were thinking, how on earth does this happen? Like international products usually command a premium, they're perceived as safer. And we couldn't figure it out. And we ran the analysis again, we ran it 3 times. And then we found that it came up the same every time. And if you look, a lot of these foreign dairy brands and whatever type of food brands, they'll come to China, they'll visit, they hopefully will get beyond Shanghai, but they'll go into a supermarket and they'll see rows of 1 litre Tetra Paks. They'll go online and they'll look through screens and screens of 1 litre Tetra Paks, all these imported dairy brands, and I think, well, this is what we got to do, this is what everyone's doing. If you look, 98% of all 1 litre packaging sold online is from international or imported brands, Whereas the Chinese domestic brands, they look at the way Chinese are consuming milk. They understand the customers in many cases a lot better. And they bring in these smaller portion sizes. So Chinese, the way that a lot of them don't even really like milk as much as somewhere like Australia. So they don't have the gallon of milk in the fridge that they'll pour out these big glasses and drink. A lot of them will have quite small servings. But they also have this issue around freshness. So the minute you open a 1 litre Tetra Pak, even if it's UHT, it's not considered fresh the minute it starts oxidising. And there's a real issue around freshness, a real perception of fresh being better in China. So the minute you open that 1 litre, if you put it back in the fridge or in the shelf, as some do, and drink at ambient temperature, you don't want something that's going to go off. So single serve, convenient, you can carry it around in your handbag, whatever, do much better. Hence, the local brands selling a lot more smaller packaging. Another thing is segmentation. And if you look at, again, plain white milk, most foreign brands will come in and they'll sell normal plain white milk to Chinese consumers. And most Chinese consumers kind of want to feel like they're getting a little more love than just the same homogenous generic milk that's selling for 1.4 billion other consumers. So the local brands, again, have got much smarter about that and got quite segmented in the way that they position their milk. So they have things like children's milk, helps you sleep, helps your brain development, helps your bone development, much more targeted milk. Whereas there's gym goers milk for high protein for millennial gym goers, there's elderly milk for joints and things. There's all these really targeted milk products. And you're seeing it more and more in all these different food categories, that instead of just having a generic, wide-reaching product, those that are most successful, and it's becoming more and more common, have much more laser focus. So a niche such as children's milk in China is obviously 15 million new customers a year, so it's pretty large. So you're getting these niches much more targeted, much more relevant. You're telling consumers this product is more relevant for you. So one of those things that we're seeing a lot of in China from the successful brands. Now you probably look at this individual and think, this is a very attractive young lady. It's actually a young man, and it's really representative of the tribes that you're starting to see, particularly from post-95s. This guy here is, he's heterosexual, he's a very famous live streamer on e-commerce. So he sells a lot of makeup to men. And men's makeup is growing rapidly. It's grown about 50% year on year in the last couple of years. You're getting things like BB cream and eyeliners and things that are growing almost 200% year on year. The top fastest growing clothing fashion for men online is lacy, transparent, typically quite feminine styles are selling these men. And I guess what it represents is that consumers are no longer just this generic, homogenous, conforming group. Now they're much more risky and much more confident in what they like, and they're forming these tribes, whereas as the state media affectionately calls them, sissy boys. A lot of these boys that wear makeup and platform shoes and all sorts of trends inspired by Korea and places. So you're starting to get these consumer groups who in themselves are incredibly large groups. And again, if rather than just having a generic message, you can really hone in and target these groups through both marketing and products. It's one of those big trends that's happening in the market. Now, I'm going to take it back a few years, and there was a very successful entrepreneur in the western city of Chengdu, and he went around and people's rubbish bins in these complexes, the really expensive apartment complexes, he'd roll up his sleeves and dig through people's rubbish bins, and he'd seeing a lot of these milk containers, a lot of these honey containers, a lot of these juice containers, and from that he'd start a little shop right across the road or inside the complex, and he started stocking it with the milk he'd seen a lot of in the rubbish bin or the honey or whatever. Fast forward to a few years ago, and you've got a company called Alibaba. And every time someone buys something online, which is now about 20% of the market, and they're about 3/4 of that, they have a pretty good data that will show them that this neighbourhood around here is buying a lot of Australian honey. This market around here is buying a lot of Australian milk. And so they look at that, and then they look at mobile payments, which they obviously account for more than half of mobile payments. And you guys, if anyone's been to China recently and you didn't have payments set up on your phone, you're probably a little bit paralysed. Like everywhere you go in China now, everyone is just paying with their phones. It's absolutely phenomenal. If you pull out cash, they look at you, their eyes roll, and they're like, another stupid foreigner that can't figure out how to get payments working. So payments are everywhere. In 2016, the market was about $5 trillion US. That was about 50 times the size of the next biggest market, the US. Last year, it was up to $45 trillion. Absolutely phenomenal. It is everywhere. And most of it's giving this incredible data for the likes of Alibaba and Tencent, who own pretty much the category. So every time you go in there and you pay, they're saying, oh, people that are going into a shop around here like to buy Australian milk. And we're also seeing e-commerce, they're buying Australian milk. So they set up these stores, these new retail stores, Humar or Fresh Hippo, and they're putting these stores together based on this incredible data they have. The kind of data no other company in the world has on people. Absolutely phenomenal. So you look at these stores, there's less than 200 right now of Humar, but it's really their average square metre of sales is their revenue, is 4 times higher per square metre than a normal supermarket. One, because they've got this data, they can give customers what they really like. 2, because they have a wonderful experience, and you go in there and you have this great experience when you go shopping. And thirdly, people trust stuff. When they buy it, they know it's going to be fresh. It's from this Humar Fresh Stop. And so people will just buy it on their mobile, their Humar app, and have it delivered. So 60% of this retail shop sales go through their app. So absolutely phenomenal. If you look at the top 10 supermarket chains in China, 7 of them are either owned or in bed with Alibaba or Tencent. So you're going to start seeing more and more of this rolling out across those supermarket chains. So as a food and beverage brand, you probably want to be looking at that and how you can make sure your products are relevant and supporting marketing materials and things. And we're doing some work with McCain in China, and I know the Humar guys pretty well, so I went and saw the Humar guys and I said, hey, what's the chance of getting some of these frozen chips in some of your freezers in the shop there? And he's like, not going to happen. Why not? He's like, we're actually getting rid of a lot of these freezers because people aren't buying frozen stuff so much anymore. And I scratched my head and I'm like, that totally makes sense. So we're doing in-home immersion research as part of this project, and we'd go into these Chinese consumers' kitchens, open up the little ice box of a freezer they have, and there's nothing in there. There's a little bit of some frozen dumplings covered with freezer burn and things. They're not really using their freezers much. And why would you, when you can go online or go to a shop and have something delivered in 30 minutes right back to you? You're not as likely to want to muck around with frozen, which isn't considered as healthy, and also the inconvenience of defrosting and stuff where you can just get it delivered. So it's changing the way people shop, this new retail, and particularly in the food and beverage space. Everyone here heard of Luckin Coffee? Absolutely fascinating. I've been following the coffee industry, and obviously being from Melbourne, I'm sure a lot of you guys probably quite interested in coffee, but China I've found absolutely fascinating because you have this nation of tea drinkers, and then there's this company called Starbucks, and they come in and they've just grown phenomenally. There's about 3,500 Starbucks stores in China. And China, in almost every market, particularly food and beverage, is incredibly fragmented. There's no one, even of the big brands, no one really holds more than 10% in just about every category. Starbucks had more than 70% of the coffee market in China. Absolutely phenomenal. And then this little upstart called Luckin Coffee came along, And they really looked at China in the way that consumers are behaving, the way that successful business models have been run. And they ran it kind of like a startup. A lot of these very well-resourced startups in China, and they looked at the new retail model and looked at the importance of delivery, and they looked at mobile payments and all these things. And they also are a lot more cost-effective. So these guys grew phenomenally. There's going to be there's already 3,000 stores in 40 cities in China. They're going to outnumber Starbucks by the end of the year. They IPO'd on NASDAQ within 17 months of opening their first shop. And that NASDAQ, it obviously gets all these quick startups, these tech companies, but these guys set the record for the shortest amount of time before launching, and they're a shop. So absolutely phenomenal story. And a lot of their success, other than price, has come around to convenience. Like Chinese people, even if they have a coffee shop downstairs in their office building, will still get a cup of coffee delivered to their office. Like they think that's there's nothing wrong with that. Convenience is king. So really important as a food and beverage maker, the more convenient you can make it. I know when I was learning Chinese, fengbian was one of the first words I learned, which means convenient. It's incredibly important. So that comes down to packaging, to the product format, everything to the channels that you're selling through. Really important to make sure you hit that convenience nail on the head when you're selling to Chinese consumers. And I don't think you need to be a $1 billion plus startup, well-funded startup to create convenient products. You don't need the infrastructure. You can just do simple things. And this is something that went viral in China not long ago. I don't know how the colours come out well on the screen, but effectively, a problem I always have with bananas, it's the first one's great, or when they're a little bit not ripe enough, they're not good. Then there's that sweet spot, and then obviously they're a little bit done. But these guys solve that problem, that consumer problem, with a pretty basic solution. So a really good option for just illustrating how convenience can be done right from a small banana company. Everyone here heard of Three Squirrels? It's my favourite brand. Anyone that hasn't, look it up. It's such an example of how to be successful in China. These guys started 7 years ago in one of my favourite names of a place in China, a place called Wuhu in Anhui province. And within 7 years, they just listed recently on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, and they're almost a $3 billion market cap. This is a 7-year-old food company. And they looked at the way consumers consume, and they said, let's make this fun. Let's make this an experience. So obviously experience is thrown in for a lot of food and beverage, and it's a wonderful experience consuming it from the way it looks, but they've taken it another step, and they've created these 3 super cute mascots, these 3 squirrels, kind of Alvin and the Chipmunk-esque guys, and they've made sure that these squirrels are part of every touch point in the customer journey. So right from when you ring up customer support, they will call you an owner. And if you buy one of these packets, you adopt one of these squirrels. So it's really right through from the retail store. You have this wonderful guys that are all dressed up in kooky squirrel stuff going on. They've made movies, they've made games about it. There's talk of a theme park for 3 squirrels. They've really brought this experience to life. And when you buy these nuts, you'll get if it's relevant, you'll get nutcrackers, you'll get a little wipe, because I've looked at what do people have issues when they buy nuts. They get a little bit dirty hands, so they give you a wipe. They give you a little bag for the shells. All these things that just make that experience better. And Chinese, a lot of their lives, not as many would play sport, not as many would do activities after work as a place like Australia. So they work quite late, a lot of them. They spend a lot of time commuting. So they look for escapes through the products they buy, through the experience. So if you can give them that experience as a brand, that will see you in a much more favourable light. Three Squirrels, we did analysis into the price of nuts, similar to the milk example I gave earlier. And we looked at Three Squirrels, us charging quite a premium over even imported nuts So they've managed to be this Chinese brand that is charging a significant premium over these perceived great foreign brands. Now, I talked a little bit before about Alibaba and the data they own for the new retail. The thing about the data in China is a company like Alibaba in most countries in the world would be split up. They just have too much. They have an incredible amount of data on people. And they don't only have the Alipay, they have the e-commerce data, they also own a whole lot of other things, from Weibo, the second largest social media network, to Youku, the YouTube equivalent. They have all this data. Something they've also started investing heavily in is facial recognition. And they're using it in many different ways. One is payments. So in the past, mobile payments has been great. You don't need to bring your wallet anymore when you're in China. You can just go out with your phone, which everyone already has. Now they're making it so you don't even need your phone. You can just rock on up, stand there, have your things and buy it. And if you're busy playing a video game or whatever, it doesn't matter because you can just get your face scanned and pay. It's very convenient. And Chinese consumers don't have the same privacy concerns as people in the West do. So there's no worries about having your facial data and all this other data. But what Alibaba's also done in their home city of Hangzhou, traffic was really bad. It was the 5th worst traffic in China. And they installed these little CCTV cameras all over the city to what they call City Brain. And what it does is it monitors traffic. And it will track if cars are coming and stuff, and they'll change the traffic lights as a result. And it's worked really well. Hangzhou has gone from the 5th worst city for traffic to the 50-something worst city. So it's improved a lot. And all these other cities are going, hey, we want that too. We want to improve traffic in our city. So you're getting these guys that not only can they track cars, but they can also track faces. And they have faces from all their mobile payments. They've already got your face scanned, so they know who you are. They can link that back to what you're buying on e-commerce, where you're going on holiday, all these other things. So you can get some really interesting things happening. And another one of the e-commerce giants, JD, they've just launched this new concept supermarket in Beijing. And you the first time you go there or use the app that scans your face, and after that you never have to worry about it. You go in there, you get your trolley, and they have smart shelves, and you can grab some food, an apple from the shelf, and it can sense the weight of that apple has been taken off the shelf, put it in, it's scanning your face, and you can pretty much just walk out of the shop and it will charge you for that apple or whatever it is. So there's some pretty interesting in the food space. But what's getting really creepy is last July, Alibaba bought a company called Focus Media, and anyone that's been to China is probably familiar with, may not have ever heard of them, but you're probably familiar with the screens you get everywhere in elevators and the back of cars walking down the street. And it isn't official, but I'm guessing there's going to be little cameras on those screens, and you're walking along and it scans your face, and it's like, yeah, that's Joel from just down the road, and we know that he's just been on holiday to Australia. We know that he's been buying a lot of fitness products on e-commerce. Let's put a really targeted advert on this, personalised advert just for him on this TV screen that's talking about fitness health products from Australia. So you're going to start getting really personalised, targeted type things. You're starting to already see it on the e-commerce platforms. They're doing some quite personalised. If you land and you've bought up a whole lot of things, you're probably going to have a different landing page than someone who's bought a whole lot of different things. So personalisation is really starting to take place. It's none of the DNA type stuff just yet, and that's still very, very early days, but you're getting definitely some of these personalisation styles happening. Now, something I've been personally very interested in and following closely, and it's been a theme of yesterday, obviously, is sustainability. And if you look at some of the numbers, China is incredibly progressive. EVs, for example, they account for about half of the world's EV purchases. But if you look, when the government subsidies ended, went from 126% growth in 2017 to 2% growth last year. Just shows a lot of that motivation is purely financial rather than trying to save the world. And you look at things like meal delivery. More than 10 billion packages get delivered every year in China, like with plastic upon plastic upon plastic. As I said, with luck in coffee, they deliver a single cup of coffee. So there's this kind of strange lack of awareness around sustainability and things. You talk to any consumer, they'll say, yeah, I want to buy a sustainable product, I want to promote it. But if you look at their behaviour and the premium they're prepared to pay, in many cases it's a little bit contradictory. So it's this mentality that as an individual, one of 1.4 billion people, what can I do? If I do that, it's not going to save the world. And there's almost an expectation that the government should be leading this. And fortunately, the government is now starting to lead it. So in Shanghai in July, they launched a new, very punitive recycle program. And you have to put your different packaging in 4 different categories. And if you don't, and you get found out, you get a 200 kwai fine, so about a $40 fine. Businesses get a 50,000 kwai fine. So it's really brought sustainability, packaging, etc. to the fore. And you're starting to see already a lot of brands, a lot of food packaging brands are reacting. Are reacting already with stickers about how to recycle, because there's limited awareness about sorting and packaging. But also some of the brands are now doing compostable packaging. A lot of stuff you've been seeing here for a while, but it hasn't really been much of it in China. Starting to get tree planting programs. A lot of those environmental things that have been happening here for a long time that are finally starting to take off in China, and hopefully that will keep that sustainability conversation top of mind, and we'll see some other positive effects of that. So yeah, I would watch the sustainability space. I think it's only a matter of time before it catches up to places like Australia. So just to sum up, China's GDP growth, and everyone talks about GDP, it's the number you hear most with China. It has been driven by these digitally obsessed consumers, millennial consumers. They're living all over China, and post-2020, you're going to see more and more brands localising for those different geographies. The products and the marketing and everything is much more specific to consumer needs, consumer segmentation and things, rather than just generic, homogenous, one-size-fits-all. They've been optimised by channel, and if you look at e-commerce now, it's over 10% of FMCG, it's 20% of retail as a whole. Starting to get more and more brands that are looking at the way consumers shop on e-commerce and really optimising their packaging, their portions, all that for e-commerce relative to convenience, to hypermarts, all that type of stuff. So you're starting to get that type of thing happening now. But its convenience is a really important. If you can tie that in with your product, your channels, it definitely will make life easier for your brand. Experience, really important. Three Squirrels, great example. Make it fun for consumers. And segmentation is evolving with personalisation. Personalisation is going to touch everything from product, DIY, to marketing, to everything else. And finally, sustainability is hopefully going to happen. So I think we've got a little over 10 minutes for questions, but I just want to my email address is up there if any of you have any questions or interested in anything related to China. And probably the most important thing I can say from today is our newsletter. And I'd highly recommend if anyone is interested in China trends, it comes out every Wednesday. We try and keep it pretty concise and really informative, and you can subscribe on chinaskinny.com and hopefully keep you up to speed with what's happening in the China market.
Thank you, Mark. Please join me in thanking Mark. That was a terrific presentation. And I certainly do endorse the China Skinny e-newsletter. I've been reading it regularly and it's a great resource.
Thanks, Virginia.
We now have the opportunity for some question and answer. You can submit your questions via the app, as I mentioned, or we do have some roving microphones. If anyone has a question, yes, please. Thank you. If you could just say your name and where you're from, thank you.
Michelle Terry, AACO. Interested in Chinese consumers' perception of claims on food, and also who are credible endorsement sources, and does this vary by generation? So, I guess I'm presuming older generations might be most government-led, but I'm just thinking about how to market to different generations and whether it needs to be Chinese domestic claims or, for science from an Australian university, or, what's going to be most resonant?
Very good question. It's something, I'm going to use a slightly off-segment example, but it's the most we've delved deep into the endorsement. Obviously, most people here, I'm sure, are familiar with key opinion leaders, which are massive in China. If you look at a market like the US or the UK, it's about 10 or 11% of all food and beverage products or advertising has some kind of celebrity or influencer endorsement. China, it's up around 50%. Absolutely phenomenal. And we looked, for Tourism Australia, we looked at who the key opinions, who the influencers should be, and we looked at guys like famous Australians, from Julia Roberts to... No, not Julia Roberts, sorry. All the famous Australians you've ever heard of. And we looked at them, and then we looked at Chinese endorsers like actual specific travel KOLs, and the local guys actually scored higher for believability, for relevance to me and things. So I think you definitely need an element of local endorsement, but obviously credibility does come with some of the local guys. But one thing I would say about the local endorsement is they also have a very established network of followers and fans and that, so they can really not just say you're great, but also get it out to a lot of people. If you don't have that, you can have the greatest endorser on the planet, but if they can't reach Chinese consumers, it doesn't really work. Michelle, also, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely I think a combination. If you've got someone that is a global expert and is not Chinese, that'd be great to include, but almost to have that with this local key opinion leader that has that network of social media followers or live stream followers or whatever. And around claims, you've got to be very careful about what claims you can actually make in China. Things like superlatives are out. Health claims are obviously a lot stricter in China.
Thank you. A question from down the back, if we could, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Jonathan Lilly, Yamba. We're involved in aquaculture, abalone. I've been to China quite a bit, and I've sort of worked out that the Chinese love a Western brand, but I feel as though they have great difficulty in understanding how to build a Western brand in China. But you might have a different sort of perception of that. They've, as you know, sometimes they lack respect for brands by copying them, etc., but which is, obviously a good thing in some ways. But what's your take on China's ability to build brands within China?
I think the Chinese brand builders are running circles around all of us experience. Like, they're very new to the game, and marketing has not been something they really understood until quite recently. But if you look at FMCG, 2017, 98% of the growth came from domestic brands. Last year it was around 75%. So they are getting incredible at building brands, for one, and two, they know the consumer a lot better. They understand the channels, they understand the package sizes, all the types of messaging that resonates. So whilst imported brands have a better perception in many cases, that perception's not been capitalised in just by making this proposition that disconnects with consumers and not having the proper channel. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Right. Any other questions from the audience? No?
Tough crowd.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, at the back. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, Mark. Guy from the International Business Development Team. I had a quick question around sort of Tier 2 cities. You talk a lot about the importance of looking beyond Tier 1 cities for growth. What are the cities or provinces you're finding the most growth and results with customers that you're supporting and doing consulting for?
It's a good question. Yeah, a lot of people have been talking for a long time about looking beyond these incredibly contested cities like Shanghai, Beijing. Everyone seems to want to go into those cities. And in some cases, they are better. The consumers are more sophisticated, their spending power, they are more appropriate, particularly for more sophisticated products and premium products. But in other cases, in so many cases, there's an awful lot of opportunity in these lower tier cities that are much less contested. People have a higher disposable income just because their cost of living is a lot lower. It's interesting that a lot of the growth, FMCG growth, it's been growing about 2 to 3 times faster in lower tier cities than Tier 1 over the last few years. But as of last week, Xi Jinping actually announced a new strategic direction for China, that they are actually going to focus on 10 mega cities in China rather than really trying to push a lot of the wealth around China and out west. Now that it's looking back like they're drawing back and really trying to pick a few winners and really help that. So it may buck things around a bit. But to answer your question, Guy, I'd say cities like Hangzhou, Chengdu, there's even some of these crazy cities close to Guangzhou that are pretty much a suburb, Foshan, cities like that are really growing quickly, Wuhan. But I think it's all about looking at that specific city and the lifestyles and the tastes and seeing is your product actually relevant, because it does vary from city to city. If you've got a health product, there's a lot more runners in cities like Shanghai than there are in cities like Beijing, where it's really, really, really cold a lot of the time. So yeah, it's all specific to that product.
Terrific. Probably have time for one more question. Yes, standing at the back. Thank you.
Jacob Habner from the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation. More and more we're getting approached by non-Indigenous owned companies in Australia wanting to export their products into China with an Indigenous brand. Primarily in the sort of seafood sector and the nutraceutical sector. Would or does that Indigenous Australian story resonate in China in any of those demographics or sectors?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of Australian brands come in and they'll say we're green and we're clean and we're healthy, which Australia does have a great perception for that. But at the same time, so does Switzerland, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, all these other countries. So the great thing about the Indigenous angle is it provides a point of difference. It does make it a little more interesting, and particularly when you're brand building, it's good to have something slightly different rather than just another clean, green, pure, transparent supply chain, etc. But interestingly, we looked at, for tropical North Queensland, tourism tropical North Queensland, obviously they're a big part of their tourism campaign is around the Aboriginal people. And we showed a whole lot of different pictures to Chinese consumers and said, which of these kind of connects most with their resonates? And surprisingly, the Aboriginal pictures were the least resonant of all. And similarly, we did some imagery for actually an Australian food brand, and we asked around icons, which of these icons are most, well, which ones do you know and which ones are most resonant? Things like the map, the flag, people didn't really know them that much, whereas the boomerang actually was quite well known. But again, they didn't feel warm and fuzzy about the boomerang. They saw it as a weapon and things. So I think it's really important, if you are using the Aboriginal angle, like the issue with these Chinese consumers around the visual, the imagery was they seemed angry, they weren't smiling and stuff like that. And Chinese want kind of cute, fluffy, warm and fuzzy stuff. So make sure if you are having that component, it's quite non-aggressive, non-confronting as possible, because there's some beautiful stuff that you could totally integrate.
That's terrific advice, Mark. Thank you so much. Could I encourage everyone to jump onto Mark's China Skinny e-newsletter? Get in touch with Mark if you need information. And also, don't forget, Australia-China Business Council is here to assist as well. Jump onto our website as well. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very, very wonderful presentation. So please join me in thanking Mark.
Cheers.